Welcome to Spencer's Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today I am happy to welcome a guest. My guest is Stephen T. Collis. He is a professor, a law professor at the University of Texas Austin Law School and a founding faculty director at UT Beck-Lachlan First Amendment Center and its Law and Religion Clinic. He, as well as having a background in law, also has an MFA from Virginia Commonwealth University. That is actually where I met him when he served as a youth leader at our church. And above all, he has written 5 books, which is the reason why I wanted to invite him on and talk to him. And those 5 books are quite ranging in their topic and what exactly they touch upon. He has one that is a suspense thriller at any cost. He has one that is a historic fiction that's based on a real event, the downing of a pilot during the Korean War, praying with the enemy. He has one that touches upon the tragic loss of life with the during World War II, the transport ship, the Dorchester, as well as his most recent book, which is geared towards helping all of us be better communicators and helping bring down the political temperature just a little bit. In his book, Habits of a Peacemaker: 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. Professor Collis, welcome to the show. Is there anything I didn't mention that you would like to add?
Uh, Happily married for 25 years and a father of 5 children. That's probably the most important aspect of my life.
Yes, I won't disagree with that. Well, thank you for coming on to the show. As I was just mentioning, you have 5 books. I've read 4 of them. I've purchased the 5th one, and I'm excited to get into that one. But I'm just curious, looking at the diverse range that you have, as well as your own background. Well, let me ask my first question. As I look at these books and I read these books, I want to know why law school? Was that always the plan for you? Or when I met you, you were getting your MFA. So was there a hope to be an author and law school just seemed like a more realistic approach? Or did you always plan on going to law school after you got your MFA?
I always planned on doing both. So by the time you and I met, I was in the middle of the doing the MFA program and already had plans to go to law school. And my wife and I had come up with that kind of life plan long before you and I met in Virginia. So actually, my first semester in my MFA program was spent preparing for the LSAT and getting ready to apply, so we'd know, what my test scores were and where I could apply. And yeah, there's a lot of reasons for why we decided to go down that path, but I'm glad I did. It's allowed me to write in a variety of ways, and uh, as you can tell from my writing, I don't just focus on one methodology or one type of writing, but I've been able to kind of move around quite a bit, and I enjoy that immensely. I like having the flexibility of being able to go back and forth between creative writing and scholarly writing and even some self-help writing.
So, on that topic, I imagine the books I've read are all very engaging, and I would assume that your MFA has a lot to do with your actual writing style. Would you care to defend law school in your approach to writing or the quality of your writing?
Well, law school does teach you writing, but it focuses mostly on legal writing and
Mhm.
how to be a good legal writer. And so I would say I don't use a lot of the writing skills I learned in law school for the books you've read.
Mhm.
That's more from my creative writing background. But I use the writing I learned in law school for the advocacy I'm involved in. So one of the things I do as a law professor is I get asked to file amicus briefs to the Supreme Court or in other courts, provide legal analysis on things. And there, it is a unique style of writing that you have to be able to use. And quite frankly, the best legal writers are also the clearest writers who are also great at things like similes and metaphor and other, forms of speech. And so the two things do intersect, but it's a different type of writing you learn in law school.
I noticed you of course, specialize in religion and law, and your books that you've published, faith is at least a part of almost all of them. And I didn't know if you wanted to comment on why exactly that is part of these, more widely distributed books that you have written, or why exactly you went down the path of focusing on the First Amendment and faith in the law, or just any insights about how that has informed why you've written what you've written about.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell you that I had some grand plan in that regard, but I went to law. I was at a top law school, and we had the top legal scholar in the world was there when I was there, a man named Douglas Laycock. And I got very fortunate that he was only there for 3 years before he moved on. He and his wife are this academic power couple. She got made the provost of the University of Michigan, and that's why he was at Michigan when I went to law school. And then she later became the president of the University of Virginia, and he then went there. But they're this power couple, and here she is, the president and provost of these major universities, and he is one of the leading is probably the leading scholar in the world of religion law. I took his class on a whim. I didn't even know it was really a field, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I just was so interested, and I've always been drawn to First Amendment, freedom of speech, publishing. That's not too surprising as someone who's into writing. But you combine my interest in free speech law generally, and then I just fell in love with the religion law stuff. I mean, I simply could not get enough, and I've kept my foot in those waters ever since. After I took that class, I kind of took steps to network in the field and kept trying to make a name for myself. And then I started publishing and writing. I started teaching, and even when I was in private practice, I chaired our law firm's religious institutions and First Amendment practice group. So even when I was practicing law, it's kind of a big chunk of what I was doing. And so for me, it's just been something I just have an extreme interest in. It's kind of inborn. It's not strategic necessarily as much as I just love it and I'm passionate about it. And I'm fortunate enough to get to work in a space that I love and am passionate about. We all don't get to have that opportunity. Most people don't get to have that opportunity. So I feel very fortunate that I get to do that.
Okay. How long have you been there at UT Austin?
5 years. So I was in private practice for 9 years. Speaking of like things you're doing that you're not passionate about, I was in private practice for 9 years, and I was an equity partner at my law. I'd made equity partner. Somebody called me up one day and they said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm living somebody's dream." And they kind of laughed, and I realized very quickly. So they laughed, so I kept saying that whenever people would ask me how I was doing, and I learned very quickly that it was true. Like somebody's dreams. Some people have the dream of being an equity partner at a large firm with a big book of business, but it wasn't mine. And at the same time that I was an equity partner at the firm practicing law, I was teaching at the University of Denver School of Law because I was in our law firm's Denver office,
Mhm.
and then I was writing articles, academic articles, and I had gotten a book deal and it just, I was on these intellectual highs when I was teaching and when I was writing. And then when I would pivot to the pure practice of law, I would kind of crash intellectually. And that's when it became clear to me I needed to transition into academia if I could. These, full-time professorships are very hard to get. And so I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it, but it worked out. And we transitioned from private practice to Stanford Law School, where I was a research fellow, and then
Mhm.
managed to come to Texas 5 years ago. And I don't see us ever leaving. We just absolutely love it here.
Austin is a great place. I thoroughly enjoy Austin. Um, on that note, I was wondering, I mean, so I don't exactly know what it's like in for law. I know as someone that also works in academia, in history, there's great pressure to publish at least one book. Do you have a more academic related book, or I don't even know what that approach generally is when it comes to being in academia and law.
So legal academia, I mean, I don't know that there's pressure to publish books. There's pressure to publish, and so I have my
Mhm.
like academic articles I publish. So, there's plenty of law professors that don't publish books; they just publish academic articles. Uh, Lots of times, though, people will come up with some kind of a monograph at some point in their lives. I have the problem of I enjoy tremendous flexibility in what I can publish. And so I go back and forth between publishing the books you've seen that are for lay audiences and publishing academic work. And the academic work gets me credibility in the world of academia, but almost no readership. The other books allow me to take some of these ideas and put them in a format that I can get a real audience, and you can sell tens of thousands of copies or more, and get speaking opportunities in radio and TV and podcasts, that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of a challenge trying to decide where to spend one's time when you have a lot of flexibility to do it.
Yeah, so I know you've been quoted in a fair amount. Is that in the capacity as an expert in the law, or is that in connection with the books that you've published that have, the wider audience?
Both. The book, the books. get media attention, and so those will often result in media interviews and stuff. But I get probably 4 requests a week from media outlets wanting me to comment on First Amendment things
Hmm.
because I'm an expert in that field. But I've almost reached the point where I say no to all of them because it just eats up all my time. Reporters want to call, they need context. I don't like just giving quick soundbite answers. I like giving context, and it just eats up.
Spoken like a true academic.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm not trying to be like I'm not trying to be like an activist where I just give them what they want to hear and move
All
on. I
right.
try to explain things to them, and I've reached the point where, generally speaking, I just have to turn down all the media requests. I still do some if it's a big national outlet. NPR called the other day. I'll talk to them, but usually I try to I try to just say no. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have any time for the writing, which is what I really love doing, and you really have to protect that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, looking at the books that you have published, especially for a lay audience, I mean, how have you gone about picking? As I've said, there's a fair amount of diversity. Is that because after you worked a long time on one type of book and dealing with a certain time period, you then wanted to move on to something else? Or are these a lot of different ideas that have maybe percolated at the same time and you just are, this is just the order in which you got to work on them?
Probably more the latter. I have a list of potential topics of things I want to write about. I will die before I ever finish them all. And I just kind of move along. Some of it's driven by the market, like what my publisher is interested in, what they think will sell at the time. Some of it is just driven by my own interests and very thoughtfully and for me, prayerfully deciding what I want to spend my time and energy on. Um, but I keep I have a method where if ideas pop into my head, I put them in one folder. If the idea is recurring, it graduates to another folder where I start to populate that idea. And then eventually I've got a third folder where those are the things I really know I want to work on. And there's probably about 12 or 15 things in there that are always percolating. And then there's a bunch of, much bigger lists of other ideas I have. And I kind of wait. I've got so many ideas of things I want to write about. It's more a question of which one deserves priority at any given time.
So one thing I want to know, I did want to ask about a couple of the books specifically. I was really intrigued, especially say Praying with the Enemies. You made the decision in that one to make it a historical fiction as opposed to just a straight up nonfiction. And I was curious, one, how you even encountered that story, and then where along the way did you make the decision, this will be easier if, I take a few liberties in how I tell the story.
Yeah, so the writing process is always collaborative with the publisher and my editors, in the sense that I think when you're this is not true for academic publishing, but it's true when you're publishing through a trade publisher, is that you do have to take into account what can they sell, I
Hmm.
think it'll work. I had pitched it as narrative nonfiction. It was going to be a nonfiction book, and to answer your one of your questions, I came across this story in the basement of the BYU library before I met you, like 22 years ago. And I was doing research for something else related to the Korean War. And I found this very short, out of print memoir by this pilot who had been shot down behind enemy lines. And he had published this thing in like 1956. And I remembered it. It had always lingered in the back of my mind. I thought, man, one day I'm going to retell that story and try and bring it to a new audience. And, you know, 50 some years, 60 years after he published it and it went out of print, I had the opportunity. I pitched it to my publisher. They came back and said, hey, we love it. We love this story. It seems amazing. Historical fiction it has a little bit bigger of an audience right now than pure narrative nonfiction. Would you be willing to do it as historical fiction? I mean, they probably would have gone forward with it even if I had done it as straight narrative nonfiction, but it intrigued me. There is something very freeing about doing historical fiction versus narrative nonfiction. With narrative nonfiction, you can't just make something up. If you hit a roadblock, you get stuck and you have to spend a lot of time hunting for sources or
Hmm.
trying to figure out what you're going to do next. With historical fiction, you have a little bit more flexibility to say, "Oh, I'll just kind of make up a nice device here and keep moving. And so that was very freeing for me. But I do say in the book, I tell people like, look, any the most unbelievable parts of the book tend to be the ones that are the most true, and it's usually some of the more things that people have an easy time believing that I made up. Most of what I did in that one is consolidate some people
Hmm.
to like a singular character just to make it easier to have dialogue and
Yeah.
an ongoing kind of antagonist in the book.
Yeah. Um, I know that you speak Korean. Did that come in handy considering that was about the Korean War? Did you interview anyone that spoke Korean, or did that have any benefits in this case?
I did. It had benefits. It was helpful. I will tell you, Korean is an incredibly difficult language for Americans to learn and to master, and in my case, remember. uh, and it's hard to do. And so when I was in law school, I made a very dear friend who is Korean. And I told her, I said, hey, I've got this book I want to write. I have a publisher that's interested in publishing it. Um, I want to see if this family is still around in Korea. This is this guy's name. Do you think you could help me? And, she's a native Korean. So she was actually in Korea at the time. I figured there was no chance she would find this family. She managed to find them and their story within like 10 minutes and emailed me back and said, hey, there's actually a documentary filmmaker who's making a little documentary about this family in Korea. And then she was able to connect me with the filmmaker. And it was my own Korean was helpful in that to be able to connect with the filmmaker and
Uh-huh.
know that I appreciated her language and her culture and talk to her some. But for the actual interviews, once she started connecting me with people, I had to use my friend as kind of a translator because it's
Yeah.
been 20 years, 25 years since I was in Korea. And that language, unlike Spanish in the United States, there's not as many opportunities to use Korean. So I haven't remembered it nearly as much as I wish I had.
I can relate. My field, my specialty is the pre-modern Muslim world, and so my research was in Arabic, and they say it's only hard for the first 20 years, and I think that's probably lowballing it. It is incredibly challenging, so I can only imagine a language like Korean is at least as challenging. But that was just something I was curious when I read that. So your other book that also deals with war, The Immortals, which is about World War II. What drew you to that one then? What was the? I mean, I didn't know it until near the end when you mentioned that there's the statue for the four religious figures, and that there's just it seemed to be a story that was somewhat well known, or at least that this wasn't totally something you were pulling out of a complete obscurity. So how did you, become familiar with them, and what led you to want to write about them?
Yeah, well, you'll probably notice a theme in my books that it's not intentional, but I think it's just the way my mind works, is the theme in my books tends to be about how people of very different beliefs and religious beliefs and identities can thrive alongside one another in the same society, right? Um, and this story of the Immortals, I called it the Immortals, is a very well-known story in military circles and especially among chaplains. And it's these
Hmm.
four chaplains, each of a different religion, who sacrifice themselves to save hundreds of men, all of whom have their own separate religions. Um, and from the very beginning, it was a source of pride of the United States, especially during World War II. This idea of people of different beliefs coming together and sacrificing for a higher good together. I wanted to tell that story. It's one that I came across. I work in the religious freedom space. I was in a colleague's office and he had a stamp. There was a commemorative stamp made of the four chaplains. Not long after they died, they sacrificed themselves, and this stamp was made, and it said like interfaith in action. And this stamp was meant to kind of be a rallying point for the United States during World War II, fighting Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And I saw that stamp. I thought, man, that'd be a great story to tell. And I pitched it to the publisher. They liked the idea. We ran with it. The book was originally going to be called The Immortal Chaplains, and the only books I had found about it focused on the story of the chaplains.
Hmm.
One book had, I want to say, one paragraph about this guy, Charles W. David Jr., who was a black petty officer who
Hmm.
also sacrificed himself. So the chaplains sacrificed themselves to save hundreds of men to get off a ship. And then Charles W. David Jr. dove into this frigid cold water just south of Greenland, near the Arctic Circle in the middle of winter, to save about 100 of these men that the chaplains had saved off the ship that got sunk. And in doing so, got sick and he died. And I was in the middle of researching the book. It was right in the middle of COVID. I was writing. I was trying to meet my deadline. and I come across this one paragraph about this black petty officer, and I thought, wait a minute, he sacrificed himself just like the chaplains did. We got to tell his story too. And so I immediately emailed my editor. I said, hey, I discovered this guy. We've got to tell his story as much as we tell everyone else's stories. I need you to extend my deadline. We need to change the title of the book from The Immortal Chaplains to The Immortals. And you got to give me 3 more months to kind of find his family and really dig deep into who he was and try to tell his story. And thankfully, my editor agreed, which, by the way, is no minor thing, right? Like in the trade world, they're already starting to market this thing. They're already starting to talk to librarians and others about interest in it. They're starting to get it placed in catalogs, and they pushed everything back. I was able to find his family and do a bunch of research on him. So it's about now 5 men of different religions and races who sacrifice themselves to save people who are different than them.
Yeah, I personally really enjoyed that edition. I mean, that's how you start the book then, is from his perspective, is in the, because he is, part of the efforts at actually saving the people that are in the water. And so I found that really interesting. And I was curious why you had added him, seeing as though the four chaplains were already an established story. And I didn't realize that was what had happened. How hard was it to do that additional research, seeing as though he didn't pop up till near the end of the whole writing process?
It was a challenge. I had to go back and, you know, figure out ways to insert his narrative into the story. I mean, this is narrative nonfiction. It's not academic history. So I'm
Hmm.
trying to pace these books and write them in a way that's engaging for like a lay audience. And so I had paced all the storytelling a certain way. Suddenly I've got this new character I have to inject into it.
Hmm.
It's a real person. I mean, I'm not making stuff up about these people, but then I've got to figure out, well, when do I tell his parts of the story? How do I make that flow with the overall narrative? And then I had to find his family. Thankfully, he had a child, and I was able to connect with his granddaughter and his nephew, and they were able to tell me a ton about the family. And then I did a lot of my own research and learned as much as I could about them, and that was really helpful.
Okay, cool. Did you have any of your other books that had, such a big shift there at the end, something that made you ask for another extension or anything along those lines?
No, not with any of my, well, that's not true, actually. I had decided my very first book's called Deep Conviction. That one is for lay audiences, but it's the closest to like legal academic work I'll do
Hmm.
for a lay audience. And I was telling the story of 4 cases, critical Supreme Court cases related to religious freedom, just to help people understand kind of just how complex religious freedom law really is. And the very last story I was telling was percolating through the Supreme Court while I was writing the book.
Mm.
So that's a little bit difficult because I had to kind of like try to rule, and so I could foreshadow and things like that. And then I had to wait for the court to rule and then finish the book. And so I built it into my contract. I said, look, the court's going to rule latest by X date in June. You need to give me like, I think I can't remember, it was like until August 15th or something to get the manuscript to you because I need to see how the court rules and then go from there.
Okay.
So that made for a stressful summer because the court ruled a little bit sooner than I was expecting, and I had to meet the deadline then with the publisher in a way that was stressful, but okay.
Okay. That is actually the one of your books I have yet to read. It's the one that I have purchased and it's on my to read list. But so let's take a look then at your last book or your most recent book. This is the one that just came out last year, or at least you were still doing promotions of it last year. I mean, knowing our current political climate, I fully understand why someone would want to write a book along these lines. But I mean, I guess just tell us your exact reason and possibly your approach as to how you decided on this book specifically, and the idea of these 10 ways to help us to you know, hear each other a little better.
Yeah, so it's called Habits of a Peacemaker, and 10 habits for having productive conversations about hard topics. As a First Amendment scholar, I travel all over the globe really talking about the freedoms of the First Amendment, which of course are religion, speech, and the press, and the right to assemble and petition the government. And um, those freedoms in and of themselves are controversial enough, but then you add the topics that they touch on, that they intersect with, things like
Hmm.
academic freedom, campus protests, press freedom, abortion rights, constitutional interpretation, LGBT plus rights, right? These are pretty controversial, difficult topics for people to have conversations on. And um, I realize as I travel around the globe and speak at conferences and speak to audiences that generally speaking, we have very productive conversations, even if we really disagree fundamentally about some of these different topics. And it got me wondering, what is it that I'm doing? What is it that we're doing? These people that I'm having productive conversations with, what is it that we're doing that are allowing those conversations to be productive? And could I figure out what those habits were? Figure out the scientific basis behind them. Like, why do these habits work? And then distill that into a book that I could share with others. And my hope was people could take those habits and apply them in any area of their life. It doesn't have to be, heavy constitutional law issues or First Amendment related issues, but any difficult conversation dealing with family members, in employment settings, work, students at school, all sorts of settings where we have difficult conversations. My hope was to just give people some habits that they can use in their life and make themselves a little bit better at productive discourse. So that was where I spent the last 3 years essentially researching that topic and trying to work on it.
Something I really enjoyed about that book was this was your first book, at least that I've read, that you include a fair amount of personal anecdotes. You also have a fair amount of theoretical conversations to help guide the direction of the book. But I was interested that this was your first book where you put a little more of your personal story into trying to illustrate the points that you were discussing. Um,
You
uh,
didn't end up in there, did you?
Not that I recognized.
Some vague reference to a kid in Virginia? I don't
I
think
don't
you're.
think so. I knew some troublemaker. No, that was not one that I recognized any of. I know your novel At Any Cost. I know that that's based around Richmond, and I was happy to see that. Um, representing your time at VCU. Do you have any upcoming projects that you wanted to discuss, or any other ideas or thoughts that you've been considering that I don't know, just want to let the world know that this is what you've been thinking about lately?
Oh, not particularly. I mean, I'm going to Oxford University for a conference over the summer, and
Hmm.
I'm working on some academic work related to the nature of human dignity and how that relates to freedom of speech and our ability to live in a pluralistic society among people with very different ideas. Sometimes people who really dislike us. Um, and so I'm spending my at least the next 4 or 5 months focused on that topic, and then after that, I'll probably shift to maybe thinking about my next or putting into a proposal my next book for non-academic audiences. It may actually be a young adult focused book. I've got the idea
Oh.
percolating, and I've been working on the outline. So we'll see if I can do it in a way that gets my publisher excited.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yet another, you are committed to quite the diversity in your books. That's exciting. Well, would you like to tell the viewers where you can be found? I, of course, will put all your information in the description. But if there's anything else you want to shout out now, feel free to.
Great. Yeah. I mean, easiest is probably just Google me, Stephen with a V, Stephen Collis. Google me, it'll pop right up. But I also have, my website, stephentcollis.com, and all my books are there. And I hate social media, but I post somewhat regularly on Instagram about things I'm doing and where I'll be speaking around the country. And so folks can find an updated calendar events there, and then things about the books. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on, Professor Collis. It's been a pleasure, and let's not wait another 20 plus years to catch up again. Thank you, and I wish you the best of luck in your future writing endeavors.
Thanks so much, Spencer. Good to see you again.
Thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate all of your support. As a reminder, I've just recently launched another channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. You can find a link to it in the description. Please go check that out if that sounds remotely interesting to you. Also, I have recently launched a Patreon for this channel. Please check that out. I greatly appreciate any way that anybody can help support this channel so that I can bring you more videos and more reviews so we can keep talking about books. And as always, until next time, keep those pages turning.